I'm Kevin Davis. This is the Catholic Family Podcast, and I'm overjoyed as always to have a guest who's been coming on for a long time now. It's one of those incredible things that I don't know how I managed to get him on a show in the beginning, and he's been here with me, pretty regularly for the last two and a half years, something like that. And that is Introibo. Everyone, please go check out his blog, Introibo Adultare Dei 2.blogspot.com. Weekly material every Monday. It's fantastic stuff that covers all sorts of things from philosophy, theology, occultism. I think many of you people know many of you listeners know that we've covered a lot of occult topics in the past. I think now, I don't know, 15 or more videos on that. Please go check that out. It's not something, it's not easy listening. That's unfortunately Introibo has the hard task of talking about things that are not very enjoyable. They're not very nice typically, but they're very important. They're things that are bringing to light darkness, I suppose, really evils in the world. And that goes with, we've talked about yoga, we've talked about bad movies, witchcraft, etc. Important stuff now in October as we approach Halloween. I highly suggest. I believe we did a show actually right around Halloween, maybe a year or two ago, which I'll see if I can link that in this show. But just go on the channel, research, look up Introibo, and you'll find a lot of good material. Today, we're stepping a bit away from occultism, and we're going to talk about Father Feeney. Now, many of you know his name from the Feneyites and the Diamond Brothers and the baptism of desire, etc. I think it's actually not going to be quite that topic today, but we're going to talk about Father Feeney himself. So, Introibo, without further ado, please tell us about Father Feeney.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. As always, it's always good to get the message out about the true faith. And this is a dark topic, although it doesn't deal with the occult. It deals with Leonard Feeney, as you just mentioned. I will not be referring to him as father because he died excommunicated by the Holy See, by the Pope himself. Just as we don't refer to Martin Luther as Father Luther, even though he was an unquestionably validly ordained priest. He was solemnly excommunicated by Pope Leo X and is stripped of all ecclesiastical dignity. Same holds true for Leonard Feeney, unless, of course, you belong to the Vatican II sect, in which case he was rehabilitated at the end of his life. They would refer to him as Father Feeney correctly, which is interesting.
So was that Paul VI? I didn't
Paul
even realize
VI,
that.
yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Right before his death, he was reconciled by a delegate of Paul VI without having to recant his heresy.
That's interesting, and I think I remember, and maybe you'll talk about that story that they tried quite often to get him to recant, right? To try to get him to not be excommunicated, right? And he always refused. But I assume you'll talk about that story.
Yeah, well, that's true also. That is true also. But he was, he's obdurate to the very end, and this is the case of the Vatican II sect. You can believe that virtually nobody goes to heaven, or virtually everybody goes to heaven. As long as you don't believe the truth, you're okay. And that's really what it comes down to. But yeah, I will talk about his reconciliation with the Vatican II sect, which is interesting, which stood against everything which he tried to propose. It's really, Leonard Feeney was, now one thing I do want to say, his followers, the Feneyites of today, 99% of them do not hold what he actually taught. It was made more heretical by people like Fred and Bobby Diamond, the misfit so-called monks of New York, who, do think they know what they're talking about, and rarely do they ever. Yeah, so, as I said to you before the show, expect some the Feneyites to come out of the woodwork. My friend Stephen Spire said of Feneyites, they have a sickness of soul, and they really do. They really do. Well, and
it's bizarre. Yeah,
they are bizarre people.
Yeah.
The large majority. I've known only one or two, which I could even have a conversation with.
Well, it's an amazing thing, and I bet you're the same. That when I was on Twitter, or if I was ever disputing people on YouTube or Twitter, Facebook, I would typically have conversation, even if it got heated, et cetera. But it was whenever the Feneyites came in, it's just an immediate nope, I'm not going with. I'd block them or just ignore them because they're just they're bizarre. They're all kind of crazy. And my theory, I think I've said this before, maybe it was with Steve Spray. I said, my theory is there's actually there's actually two Feeniites in the whole world. It's just the Diamond Brothers, who just spawn over and over as social media accounts and make all these comments. I'm sure that's probably not the case, but I don't believe there are that many out there. But I've also unfortunately lost friends to Feeneyism, to, as you said, it's not exactly Feeneyism. It's this obsession with the idea, a false idea of baptism of blood and desire, which I don't think we'll talk about too much today, but I do have plans to talk about that with Father Benedict Hughes of the CMRI. So everyone stay tuned for that. So we have a lot of Father Feeney type material coming out here in the near future. So, but please, Introibo.
Well, Leonard Feeney, I want to make two disclaimers. Number one, uh, the I've done a lot of digging into the past of Father Leonard Feeney from various sources. And the conclusion I think that every reasonable person who sees the evidence will conclude was that he was either, one can only conclude he was mentally disturbed, he was morally deranged, and if someone were to tell me he was demon possessed, I really wouldn't doubt it. He was that evil of a man, and it's very different from what even non-Feeneyites are told, that he was this, priest who was sick and tired of the modernists saying, you have Sister Mary Sunshine and, Father Wonderful saying that, well, in America, especially after World War II, it was diversity here of religions. And so, when the nice Protestant neighbor passed away, oh, he was saved by baptism of desire.
Mm-hmm.
That's an abuse of the doctrine. It's not correct. That is not. It's not everyone who's not somehow anyone who's not Catholic is somehow saved because they were nice. That's not what it's talking about. Baptism does not mean that at all. But that's how it was being used, by clergy that should know better, and even high-ranking clergy, especially in the United States. And Feeney was reacting against that, and of course he went to an opposite error. And because he was this way, I don't want to say. Yeah, I'm not trying to disprove what the Feeneyites contend, because Father Feeney was himself evil, perhaps crazy, perhaps both. If an evil, crazy person says 2 + 2 is equal to 4, they're still right.
Mm-hmm.
If Saint Francis of Assisi said 2 + 2 is equal to 5, he's wrong, even though he's a great saint. So I'm not trying to disprove Feeneyism by saying that Father Feeney was, an evil person. What I am just trying to show here, he is wrong, of course, but for reasons aside from, and not because it's not an ad hominem attack, and I'm saying, oh, because he's evil, therefore he's wrong. No, I'm not saying. Usually when you have a movement in the church, as he's portrayed as somebody who came to restore the doctrine of the church, the ancient doctrine of the church about extra ecclesiam nulla salus, outside the church no salvation, and all the rest. When you see a true reformer like Saint Francis of Assisi, who I just mentioned, there's usually sanctity involved, usually, or at least there's, if not saintly, they're at least a holy person. But rarely do you see a movement, or to the best of my knowledge and belief, there's never been a movement to reform the church, a true reform movement, that has resulted from a man who is evil or a woman who is evil.
And I had to comment on that real quick, because it's a great point when you say that, connect that also to Luther and look at the evils that came from Luther. I mean, obviously not a true reform. It turned into a total disaster, a revolution that formed many of the evils we see in the world today come directly from that. And he was a total pervert, awful person, an evil person, and that's Luther, and that's even from his own writing. So I don't think that's even denied. So it's a great part of your point that if you're actually reforming something in the church, exactly how could you possibly do that if you're not somehow saintly, you're not following the Holy Ghost? So I think that, yeah, I totally agree.
Oh, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see that Father Feeney was anything but a good person. And who knows? I'll even say this: maybe he started out with good intentions, but you know where they lead. So the story, and the second disclaimer I'd like to make, other than the fact I'm not trying to disprove the Feeneyite heresy because their founder was evil, there will be disturbing things spoken about that listeners may want to watch if anyone under the age of 21 is listening to this. It's not suitable for everyone to hear. So having said that, the Leonard Feeney himself was born in Massachusetts, February 18th, 1897, and he entered the novitiate of the Jesuits in 1914. He was ordained a priest on June 20th, 1928. And the brief background is in the 1930s, he was a literary editor in a Jesuit magazine, now a total rag, called America. Right? And he became professor at Boston College and became a chaplain at the Catholic St. Benedict Center at Harvard Square in 1945. Soon after, he started preaching against baptism of desire and baptism of blood, and he gained a large following. His Jesuit superiors ordered him to leave the center for a post at the College of Holy Cross, but after initially going there, he returned to the center and repeatedly refused to comply with the order. Feeney was summoned to Rome to answer for his teachings, but he staunchly refused. And on February 13th, 1953, the former Father Feeney was solemnly excommunicated vitandis by Pope Pius XII. And he died, well, it depends how you want to look at it. From the Vatican II point, he was rehabilitated. Sedevacantists point, he was not. So one of the things that you'll often hear about Leonard Feeney from those who idolize him, as well as those who really don't have a good idea about him. They think he was just a misguided priest. He's often portrayed as being a theologian. He is not. He was never a theologian. He is not a canonist. All right. He is also portrayed as somebody who was excommunicated for disobedience. No, he was excommunicated for heresy, actual heresy, and that will be proven. All right. It was also stated that that Father Feeney was a good and holy priest. He was anything but, and was known to use derogatory slurs against people and even to blaspheme against the Holy Trinity. This is publicly attested to.
Wow.
So, despite claims of his followers that he was a learned scholar, Leonard Feeney was never someone in possession of a doctorate in sacred theology, going by the initials STD, or a doctorate in canon law, a JCD, as my spiritual father, Father DePaul, was a canonist. He held a JCD from the Catholic University of America, granted in 1955 under Pope Pius XII. Leonard Feeney had none of these. All right, and his early writings were devotional works. They were all devotional. In 1934, he published a collection of essays entitled Fish on Fridays, which became a bestseller in this country, in the United States. It's interesting because in it, he made known that he believed it was possible for a Protestant to be saved, not as a Protestant, of course, but as a Catholic who was received into the church by that rare miracle of baptism of desire. It was in one of his own writings.
Interesting.
Right? His later works, most notably The Bread of Life in 1952, that set forth his false teachings. His false teachings all took place after he arrived at the St. Benedict Center in 1945. So that's when it really, really took off.
Where is that? Is that in New York? Just out of curiosity.
Massachusetts.
That's in Massachusetts. Okay, interesting.
Yep. Yeah. His I don't know if you want to call them proteges, but they never met. But Fred and Bobby Diamond, again, they don't teach actually what Feeney taught. They take it to the next level. I'll get to that in a moment. It's in order for someone to be considered a theologian, Salavari makes it clear that to be considered this, the cleric's work must be known for, and this is a direct quote, orthodoxy of doctrine, at least to this extent, recognized by the church, that their writings are used by the faithful and the schools with the knowledge of and with no opposition from the magisterium of the church. And that's in, that was volume 1B, page 327. So obviously Feeney, a gifted writer, could not be considered a theologian or a canonist. Once a faithful priest, he turned from the teaching of the church and denied what he once himself held.
Isn't it, just sorry to comment real quickly, it's just interesting that it seems like these the people who are making headlines back in the 50s and 60s they seem like they're always Jesuits, right? I mean, I had to ask where he was from because it makes me think of Malachi Martin, and I wonder if they were rubbing elbows because I think wasn't Malachi Martin at some point after, I guess it would have been after the second. So yeah, I guess he would have been a little bit later, I suppose, but then he would have been in New York, I think, because I think he went to New York sometime. Anyway, it's just interesting how that's kind of a strange connection. We know how steeply they took a nosedive in towards hell, really. I mean, directly after, probably before the Vatican Council. But it's interesting how these two troublemakers, I suppose, are of the same order. But anyway, sorry.
It's true. The Jesuits are. The Jesuits have become, I was going to say, in the late 19th, early 20th century, they became infiltrated with modernists. They really did. And although Feeney, though not a modernist, he went off on his own beaten path.
Right.
So, as I said before, 99% of his adherents don't teach what he taught. He taught serious illogical errors involving justification and salvation. Now, to be clear, justification is the passage from the state of sin to the state of sanctifying grace. And salvation is the passage out of this earthly life and persevering to the end in the state of sanctifying grace so as to merit heaven, either directly, if you die with no venial sin or a temporary debt of punishment due to remitted sin, or after time in purgatory, if either of those things exists. Now, the sacrament of baptism imparts an indelible character on the soul, so that it cannot be repeated. Now, Feeney taught that the character was necessary for salvation. That's not true. All right. This has never been the teaching of the church. If a validly baptized person commits mortal sin, they retain the baptismal character, but not the sanctifying grace that can accompany it. The two are distinct and separable. In Bread of Life on page 118, Feeney writes this, and I've quoted it, quote, "Justification is now being turned into salvation with the aid of water," unquote. Now, if someone's justified, they have sanctifying grace. Baptism can't turn anything into salvation. That's meaningless. This would mean you're somehow short of going to heaven as justification by faith alone, Protestants teach. On page 25 of the book, he says, and I quote, "Baptism of water or damnation. If you do not desire that water, you cannot be justified. And if you do not get it, you cannot be saved," unquote. And finally, to make sure that everyone gets it, he puts a Q&A format. Feeney presents this heretical teaching very clearly, and this is all quotes from the book. Question: what does baptism of desire mean? Answer: it means the belief in the necessity of baptism of water for salvation and a full intent to receive it. Question: can baptism of desire save you? Answer: never. Question: could baptism of desire save you if you really believed it could? Answer: it could not. Question: could it possibly suffice for you to pass into the state of justification? Answer: it could. Question: if you got into the state of justification with the aid of baptism of desire and then failed to receive baptism of water, could you be saved? Answer: never. Unquote. So you'd be in the state of sanctifying grace, you'd die, but you'd go to hell.
Huh?
That's failure of theology 101 right there.
Yeah.
And that's what he taught. And I just quoted what he had written. So in other words, you can have the sanctifying grace, but die and go to hell unless you receive baptism of water. So
talk about bizarre.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the 1917 Code of Canon Law states in Canon 1239, Section 2, quote, "Catechumens who through no fault of their own die without baptism are to be treated as baptized," unquote. Now, the church cannot be wrong in a universal discipline, such as the Code of Canon Law, which doesn't mean that universal doesn't mean by its own terms it applies in every rite, but that it applies everywhere within a rite, because the church cannot give that which is evil or an error to the church. It's an object of secondary infallibility. So that means the church literally teaches without error that someone, a catechumen, by definition, has not received baptism by water, and who die without fault of their own, without baptism, are to be treated as baptized. That could only happen if baptism and desire was true.
Mm-hmm.
So the commentary on this canon expressly states the reason. According to canonists Abbo and Hannon, the Sacred Canons, Volume 2, page 493, it says, "The reason for this rule is that they are justly supposed to have met death united to Christ through baptism of desire," unquote. Modern day Feeneyites, like the Dimwit brothers of the Most Holy Family Monastery, realized the theological position, though. See, they realized that this didn't make sense. So they teach that baptism without water, no one is saved or justified.
Right.
So that is at least, it's wrong, but it's logical. You don't get sanctifying grace ever, even with baptism of desire. So baptism of desire does nothing for you. You're still in a state of, you're not in a justified state. You have no sanctifying grace. You're outside the church, and therefore you are damned.
Do you know? I'm not someone who studied the the canon law or anything, but I've always wondered, and maybe you know this. What is their argument for saints like Saint Emerentiana, who was killed at, I think, the tomb of Saint Agnes? Is that right? Without having been baptized. That the What about the 40 the 40 holy martyrs who were put on the frozen lake, and one of them got up and renounced his faith, and then one of the soldiers laid down with the other Christians. What's their excuse for that? I heard somebody I don't know if this is true, what the Feeneyites actually believe, but someone said that they said that it must have been that an angel came down from heaven and physically poured water over over their heads before they died in order for them to have received actual baptism, which
Yeah,
uh bizarre. Sorry.
I've heard that. Absolutely, I've heard that. Uh, you know, the problem with that being, of course, it's dubious at best whether or not an angel is capable of administering the sacraments, even one that's necessary. I mean, at least if they said that Christ appeared,
Right.
okay, yeah, there you go. But it. I've also heard that. Well, it's not. Their big thing is that it's not infallible. They reduce the magisterium to ex cathedra decisions, and then their interpretation of those ex cathedra decisions. So, if something is not ex cathedra, you don't have to believe it, no matter what it is. So, the 40 holy martyrs. Well, we don't know. Somebody could have gone around there baptizing them. That's what they'll Saint Emerentia, same thing. Well, we don't know if she really died as a catechumen. She might have gotten baptism, immediately before she died,
Mm,
and that's what they'll
mm.
say. It's crazy stuff, but they will go to any length to say that without the water there is no salvation.
And it's a great point that you make, that they only believe in infallibility in terms of ex cathedra, because I think that's someone just said that recently. Again, I don't remember where, but they were saying that they're recognized and resist. So it's one of those really terrible tragedies that sedevacantists are lumped in with the Fenites. Like we are, like, if many people, and I think this is really true in the Novus Ordo and even the SSPX, I think they hear sedevacantists and they immediately think of the Diamond Brothers. They're not they're not even Catholic. I mean, it's not even just Feeney. They're wrong in so many levels that it's such an embarrassment and a shame that we're in any way associated with them. And it's only, like, literally only because they say the Pope is not the Pope since Pius XII. That's the only thing we have in common with them, except that they call themselves Catholic. That's about it. And it's such a shame that people don't understand that.
It's true, and if you notice, they will never associate. You notice they have no clergy. They used to go to an Eastern rite.
Hmm.
Um, and they would say that you could go, for example, to the SSPX, XSPV. Well, I don't know about SSPX, but they definitely said SSPV as long as you don't donate. And
Okay,
they have
because
since,
money got to go to us, right?
yeah,
Oh man.
they've since changed that, and they don't go to the Eastern rite anymore. But using that kind of logic, I mean, well, if they're teaching heresy and you think it's that bad, I mean, why not go Greek Orthodox? They're valid, and just don't give them money. It's stupid. I hate to use a word like that, but it is. It's just plain stupid. I mean, they have different categories of theological error. Like approximate to heresy, and de fide catholica divina, and uh, so they have different grades of theological certainty and different censures. Uh, you know, uh, Offensive to pious ears and things like that. Approximate to heresy, heretical. I think they should make up one for theirs. Just plain stupid.
I'm with you.
Just
I'm with you. And
worth
and, and,
it.
it, and it's so bizarre too, because you know the people who come out of the woodwork and they're bizarre, and they don't really have any arguments except for, no, you're wrong. You're not Catholic because you believe in baptism of desire. They don't really have anything to stand on. They just repeat the same things over and over. Well, and go visit our website, which I always forget, but everyone's seen it if you're online anywhere. It's go to this website and see. Yeah, because they don't actually have any positions to defend, and it's a shame. I guess we've gone a little off track. I guess we better get back to Leonard Feeney.
All right. Well, the modern day Feeniyites, like I said, have updated what Leonard Feeney himself taught so that it would be consistent. But that's not what he taught. So the Feeneyites are Feeneyites insofar as they reject baptism of blood and baptism of desire, but they are not Feeneyites insofar as they strictly teach what he taught. There's other things, strange teachings of his, which they omit altogether, and I'll get to that as well. Now, Feeney's fanatics, as I call them, he started a cult, and I hesitate to use the word cult because one aphorism said, "A cult is any religion except for mine." People use it like that. They call everything a cult. We're a cult. They're cult to me, and I use it in a very strict way, is a belief system wherein some form of coercion is used to get people in or to prevent people from leaving. So Scientology, to me, that's a cult because they try to coerce people into joining and then try to blackmail people not to leave. If you have to blackmail people, there's something wrong there. If, for example, Lutheranism is a false sect. I'm not going to call it a cult. It's a false sect. It's wrong. But to the best of my knowledge and belief, there may be some lunatic Lutheran pastor somewhere who does things like that. But for the most part, if you want to leave, you leave. You want to come, you come. They don't do anything. But what the former Father Leonard Feeney did was a cult. And what he had done, he established the Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary as a so-called religious congregation known by the Latin initials MICM from the Latin, without ecclesiastical approval and aided by a married laywoman, Mrs. Catherine Clark, on January 17, 1949, while he was still a member of the Jesuit order. He would not be expelled from the Jesuits until October 10th of the same year. We just passed the 75th anniversary of his expulsion from the order. So it is well known and well established that no one can belong to two religious orders at the same time. Cannot. And yet he could not have been ignorant of this, and that's exactly what he attempted to do. Now, Mrs. Clark took the name of Sister Catherine, a make-believe nun, and continued to live with her husband, Hank, who became a make-believe brother. All right. And this resulted in the abuse of 39 children, child abuse. All right. They took vows of obedience and chastity. Now, they're married people, and they're taking yes, there's Josephite marriage. This is not Josephite marriage. I don't know, but there's Josephite marriage. No, this is not that. This is a nut, Leonard Feeney, telling people that he's going to start a congregation without approval from the Holy See when there was a Holy See.
Right.
Without approval from the Pope when we had a real Pope, Pope Pius XII. And not only without their approval, but against their wishes, and started calling married people sister and brother. And he had them take the vows to him personally.
Wow.
He's not the head of the Jesuit order. He's not the general superior. He was not given any kind of special ecclesiastical authority under canon law or by the Pope.
And so when again was it? This was after 48 then?
Oh, this was in 1949, January 17th of 1949.
And so he was doing this without any. So he's still. How on earth? It's so bizarre because I guess I try to think of it. The Catholic Church in many ways is kind of built like a military, right? You have a very clear structure and orders, and you can't just muck around and say, "Hey, yeah, I want to form my own platoon or whatever." If you're a captain, that's just so absurd. That kind of blows my mind. Anyway, sorry.
Well, he was able to do this because now at the time, again, there was an abuse of an incorrect application, heretical actually, of baptism of desire. Everybody who's nice, and nice was given the broadest possible application, that word. I hate that word, nice. I don't think he's nice.
He's
What does
good.
that mean exactly? A polite? Well, he's got good table manners. You're going to heaven. Congratulations. But that's what anybody who's nice gets baptism of desire and goes to heaven. So why bother being Catholic? Why bother doing anything? You just have to be nice. Say please and thank you, and the rest is taken care of. So, and it was really that bad. My parents grew up, in the 1930s and 1940s. So, and they will tell you, well, God rest their souls, they can't now, but they would have told you, as they told me, that there were priests and nuns like that saying that anytime someone died, Jewish, Protestant, what have you, non-practicing, person who was never baptized one time, when my father grew up, they said, "Oh, don't worry." He the brother who should know better, Franciscan brother, told my father that, "Oh, he received baptism of desire."
Hmm.
Well, you don't know if anybody received baptism of desire. It's between the soul and God. And simply because the man was nice doesn't mean that he gets baptism of desire. This was endemic. It really was. And one of the worst places was, and this seems to be the epicenter of hell, at least in the United States, Boston,
Hmm.
which is where the pedophile scandal came, and which is in 2002 when that story broke. And it's also where Leonard Feeney himself set up his base of operations. And one of the reasons was that there was Archbishop Richard Cushing. And you'll see Feeneyite sometimes referred to Cushingism, as if, Richard Cushing made up baptism of desire and baptism of blood.
Hmm.
Right? Was he a modernist? Yeah, he was a closet modernist. Absolutely. Yeah, I have no respect for the man. At Vatican II, he showed his true colors. But when he was enforcing baptism of blood, baptism of desire, he was standing up, at least on that point, for what was Catholic doctrine since the beginning of the church. So he was doing the correct thing. But they'll say, "Oh, Cushingism teaches that, this and that." No, it doesn't teach anything. But he was saying things at that. He was, by the way, he was being investigated for suspicion of heresy by the Vatican. He
Cushing.
was Cushing.
Huh?
He, for example, when Billy Graham came out in the 1950s, and he was doing one of his so-called revivals or whatever he called it, when the people get together, everybody would say, "Yeah, yeah," and all that stuff. And uh, he urged Catholics to go and listen to him, which, that's a great way to lose someone, because
Wow.
yeah. I mean, Billy Graham, again, there's never been any, to the best of my knowledge and belief, he was probably one of the clean Protestants. I mean, I've never heard him, embezzling money, sex scandals, or anything like that. He was actually, I knew someone who knew him personally, and they said he was, as far as morals are concerned, he was probably one of the cleaner guys you'll ever find. For example, he never allowed himself to be alone in a room with anyone except his wife,
Hmm.
not even his own children. He had to have witnesses present at all times, so nobody could say, "Well, Reverend Graham did this or Reverend Graham did that." And we're going back to the 50s.
Wow.
In that sense, he was wise. He was wise to do that. And he would always have somebody, he had a large staff. He would have his staff go out and check out the hotel room before he went in to make sure there was nobody hiding there. He didn't have a woman hiding up there saying he was, he was going to proposition me, or he propositioned me. So they had to make sure there was no one in there. There were no wires or anything like that before he would go in.
Wow.
And Cushing was saying, but he's wrong. Obviously, he's a Protestant. He's in error. He's a heretic. And Cushing was telling people it was perfectly fine to go there. Cushing also told his seminarians that it was perfectly fine to read theology tomes from Protestants, not to refute them, but actually to learn from them. Okay,
Wow.
so yeah, so
And this was and this was in the 40s, or was this later with
50s,
Cushing? This was the 50s. Okay. Wow.
50s, yeah. That's not to say that all of a sudden 1950 was a magic year and all of a sudden he started doing that, but
Right.
this was going around, and that was the kind of priests that were attracted to Boston. This is the type of these are the types of heretics that were in Boston, occult heretics anyway. There's no doubt in my mind anyway that Cushing would have eventually been told by Rome that he had to either submit or recant, change his ways, or that he would have been removed from his bishopric, and he would have been perhaps even excommunicated, because he was pushing things that no bishop should be endorsing. And as a result of this, Feeney was going up against him and saying, he was preaching extra ecclesiam nulla salus and all the rest. These people don't go. And he's right. To that extent, he was right. He was extremely charismatic. If I had to analogize him to somebody, there's a very thick book, if you like a good read on a biography. It's called The Raven, and it's about Jim Jones. And he reminds me of Jim Jones, Leonard Feeney.
Yeah.
That, Jim Jones started out with the best of intentions, like he was against segregation and he was for the equality of people, and that you shouldn't put anybody down. You have to be kind to people. You can't just show favoritism to any particular race. You have to spread the gospel to everyone. Basic fair play and goodness like that. And then he, as people started to respect him more and more, he went down that dark path, and I see that in Leonard Feeney too. He started preaching on something that's correct, that baptism of the dire doesn't mean that all nice people go to heaven. He's right. And then it went somewhere else, that it can justify you, but can't bring you to heaven, and you need the baptism by water. And as far as his order is concerned, Canon 542 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law makes it very plain that, quote, married persons for the duration of their marriage are invalidly admitted to the novitiate. And that's from Abbo and Hannon, Volume 1, 559 and 558. This means they cannot become religious as long as their spouse is alive, even though they may be separated, and even if the other spouse consents that his spouse may enter religion. All right, a few more points are in order to show how it goes contrary to church law. Canon 492, Section 1 requires the approval of a bishop for the constitutions of a new religious congregation, and said bishop must first consult the Holy See. If the bishop obtains permission of the Holy See, he must then sign and publish a formal document of erection for the congregation. That comes from canonist Woywood, his practical commentary on the New Code of Canon Law, pages 206 and 207. None of that was done. They never even attempted it. All right, Feeney established a so-called congregation, and I'm always putting that in quotation marks when I say congregation, and declared himself a member of it prior to his expulsion for the Jesuits, as I had said before. And under canon law, no one may belong to one congregation or order while still belonging to another. So even if Feeney had been expelled first, he could not take valid vows in any congregation or order without an indult of the Holy See approved by the Pope. And there was a true Pope, Pope Pius XII. So according to canonists Crucian and Ellis, under the heading of impediments to valid admission, meaning to a religious order or congregation, we read that one category includes, and I quote, those who are or have been bound by the bonds of religious profession. Whoever has left a religious institute after taking vows, even only temporary ones, cannot validly re-enter the same institute, nor be admitted validly into another institute without an indult from the Holy See. It makes no difference whether the person in question was dismissed, left of his own accord, during or after his time of profession. That comes from Religious Men and Women in Church Law, 1958, page 139. Applied to Feeney, he was a member of the Jesuit order. At the time he professed, quote unquote, himself as a member of MICM, the Sleeves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which wasn't even properly established and recognized by the church. He had no indult ever from the Holy See. And his vows were absolutely null and void as per canon law. It was simply made up. Now he had 12 married couples that became brothers and sisters, and their 39 children were raised in a commune, which is against, divine. That is contrary to divine and natural law. Now, one of the very few Feeniyites that I've had any interaction with, who I must admit, at least in this brief time that we interacted, was a gentleman. There's a guy from the New Hampshire Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary calling himself Brother Andre. And he admitted to me that that Feeney having the children raised communally was, quote unquote, a mistake. Now he admits that, but it goes way beyond being a mistake. A mistake is I accidentally ate meat on Friday and I thought it was Thursday. That's a mistake. Setting up a cult and abusing children is not a
And
mistake.
then saying, "Whoops." Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That's what he did. Can you imagine, Kevin, you and your wife taking vows, and you become brother Kevin, and she becomes, Sister Mary, whatever. And by the way, the children were not allowed to call their parents mom and dad. They were punished. They had to call them by their so-called religious names.
So was Feeney targeting married people? Was that like a plan, or how did it end up being 12? Did he had others too? I would assume that other non-married people.
I assume later on, but I know definitely it started with 12 married couples becoming nuns and brothers.
That's so strange.
And that's how it all started. And, these were, and they had children. And this is how his slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary started. Canis Fanfani teaches that it is no longer permissible under the 1917 code for married couples to validly enter the religious life while their spouse is alive. He says, and I quote, mention is no longer made in the code of the possibility on the part of married persons of entering religion by mutual agreement. By the way, that was the case. You'll see in the lives of certain saints that they did that.
Right.
They did that. That was prior to 1917.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He continues and says, it therefore seems valid to conclude that once a true marriage has been contracted, the parties fall under the deriment, meaning invalidating impediment, which prevents their entrance into religion. And that's from the Catechism on the Religious State in Conformity with the Code of Canon Law from 1955. Only a papal indult from Pope Pius XII himself could dispense from the requirement, as the Pope can dispense from any prohibition in canon law that's not a part of the divine positive law or the natural law. None of the 12 couples ever received papal permission. So these were obviously invalid brothers, sisters. They were, what's the term now? LARPing, live action role play. That's basically what it was. So the result is clear. Feeney started a phony, non-canonical congregation wherein all the vows of the members were null and void as to the married couples and to Feeney himself. It is questionable, to say the least, as to the validity of the vows taken by single men and women to a congregation not recognized by the church. So there were some later on single people came in, but at the beginning, I don't think there were any single people. At the very beginning, they were just married couples. And as of February 13th, 1953, run by a cleric, a former cleric, who was solemnly excommunicated by Pope Pius XII and was not part of the church. He himself was extra ecclesiam, where we all know there's nulla salus. He could not licitly offer Holy Mass, administer the sacraments, preach, and he could only validly absolve someone in danger of death when there was no other priest available. So there's two other Feeneyite canons in these stories they try to give you, like he was a so-called theologian. There's two others that they say that he was excommunicated for disobedience. As I said before, that's a lie. It was heresy. And it wasn't done validly because only a notary signed it, or, it wasn't properly published. Both are wrong. But what is awful, the worst part of what I'm going to say in this broadcast is this: what happened to the 39 children? These 39 children are the so-called married religious who were raised in a wacky commune built for a so-called congregation. The MICM bought some houses and erected a fence around them. Leonard Feeney and Sister Catherine, who was referred to as Mother, and Feeney was simply called Father, ran the place in a dictatorial fashion. Unlike Catherine Clark and the others, only Feeney was recognized by the church as a validly ordained priest, who was, until his expulsion on October 10th, 1949, was a member of a true religious order, the Jesuits. The rest were all self-anointed nuns and brothers, never having been recognized by any ecclesiastical authority ever. Not even some non-Catholic sect like the Anglicans. They weren't recognized by anybody.
Right. They just kind of woke up one day. I'm a nun.
Yeah,
I'm a brother. Okay.
Everybody say, "Yeah, I'm a brother." That's basically the way they did it.
Yep.
Now, one such couple. Now, there's two books that I read, which were eye-opening, and I was able to get again. There were people who were and other pieces of information that were able to corroborate the stories. One is called Walled In, and it's about one of the children and the other who was raised, and the other one is called Little Sister by a woman who grew up with Feeney, and the damage that was done to them. They're both lost their faith, and God only knows where they are today. So one such couple that got into this madhouse was Mr. John Calliope and his wife Loretta. Robert was their son. He wrote the book Walled In under the pen name of Robert Connor, but Calliope was his real name. And they were overwhelmed by Feeney's charismatic appeal, his fiery speeches, and his certainty about extra ecclesia nulla salus as he thought it to be. Loretta, in particular, wanted to join and was willing to leave John, who at that time was her fiance, if he didn't join. He had to agree to get married and then become a brother. So they were married they had already been married in 1949 by Leonard Feeney. And it was a valid, he was a Jesuit. He certainly had jurisdiction and all the rest. It was a valid marriage. But they were given then the religious names of Brother Mark and Sister Mary Agnes. So that was right after his expulsion. They had 5 children by 1954. Michael, Benedict, Matthew, Paul, and Robert. While their family was growing, Feeney had been expelled from the Jesuits and excommunicated by Pope Pius XII for his false teachings. Apparently, even though they took these, I'm not certain how this happened. They took vows of chastity and obedience that they couldn't exercise the marital act, yet they had children. So unless we want to believe, unless there was, unless there was some other miraculous conceptions taking place, who knows what was going on in this man? Like I said, I'd call it's a madhouse. But they were married. This was prior to his expulsion, probably very early in the year. I don't have the exact date, but it was prior to his expulsion, and so they were validly married. And then after their marriage vows, they took these wacky vows of to become Brother Mark and Sister Mary Agnes, and then had children. So what I also read was, and I think this is the one, one of the best things as an attorney can do. I love it when I get somebody who is a hostile witness and they concede something to my side, because if they do, the judge and jury will take notice of that fact that this person has no reason to say this. So if they do, and it's helping the other side, there must be something to it. It must be true. So Gary Potter is a layman, and he is very much into the Feeneyite heresy, and he defends Feeney personally and his teachings, including how the current people teach it, the current Feeniyites. And he wrote a book called After the Boston Heresy Case. And the Boston Heresy Case was named given to the conflict between Feeney and the Vatican by some in the media. And what he says in there is going to corroborate a lot of what Robert Connor, real name Robert Calliope, wrote in Walled In, This True Story of a Cult. And there were other newspaper clippings and things like that that also showed what had gone on. The book Little Sister, published in 2019 by Patricia Walsh Chadwick, was also one of the 39 children, also corroborates much of what Calliope wrote, even though they never had any contact with each other after they left. So it would seem that this is really damning evidence. What had happened now is in 1954, Feeney now demanded the vow of celibacy from the married religious so that they could no longer he wanted to make sure that no one was exercising their marital rights. All right. So the marital debt could not be rendered, which again is against all church teaching. A married man, married woman have a right to each other's body. All right. That has always been church teaching. And he specifically imposed a vow saying they could not exercise this right ever. And they did that. All children who had been born or adopted of his followers, Catherine and Hank Clark, by the way, the so-called mother, had 2 adopted children. as they couldn't have their own children. And all the children, including whether they were natural born or adopted, had to live apart from their parents, and Feeney said he would raise and educate them. Leonard Feeney was going to raise and educate 39 children personally as father. Yeah, as the father with a capital F. Now, Father Feeney, just father. Okay. And they would live together communally with Sister Catherine, quote unquote sister. All right. So, according to the Feeneyite author Gary Potter in his book After the Boston Heresy Case, here's what he says on page 171 of the 1995 edition. Quote, the children's parents effectively ceased to exist as parents to the children, and more so as a child grew from 3 to 5 to 10 and older. Care was taken that the parents had no direct or special contact with their parents, save on a half dozen major feast days during the year when the entire community would gather for socializing. On these occasions, the children might chat with their parents, but after a certain time, the parents were seen by the children as scarcely more than a big brother or a big sister, unquote. That comes from Gary Potter. Remember now, Gary Potter defends Leonard Feeney. He himself subscribes to Feeneyism. Why would he say this unless it were true? And that goes along with everything else that I researched and found, including some legal documents up in Massachusetts. So what happened to them can justly be deemed child abuse. This is child abuse. On this basis alone, just on that, children have a right by the natural and divine law to be raised by their married parents and not reared as so-called siblings of wannabe nuns and brothers. Big brother and big sister. The Code of Canon Law on Canon 1013, 1917 code, of course, states in section 1, quote, the primary end of marriage is the procreation and education of children. Its secondary end is mutual help in the laying of concupiscence, unquote. The raising and education of children is the responsibility of the parents, not Leonard Feeney. The children were referred to as little brothers and little sisters. That's where the name of Chadwick's book comes from, Little Sister. The parents were known only by their religious names. They could never call them mother, father, mom, or dad. As a matter of fact, the children were forbidden to call parents by anything other than their religious names, or they would be severely beaten. And they were told it was wrong to be too attached to any person. They shouldn't have any friends, and they should only think about the things of God, not to play. So John Calliope, who was brother Mark, had one of his children innocently ask him one day, Mister, are you my father? That was heartbreaking when I read that. That was heartbreaking. So here's some of the strange and abusive happenings at Feeneytown, as I call it. And you had Jonestown. This is Feeneytown. Tell me after I recite this if he doesn't seem like he's got more than a few screws missing. Leonard Feeney was convinced that the outside world, that is, all those not in the St. Benedict Center, were evil and out to get both him and his followers. He made several comments that the world is against us, the world is out to get me, don't let them get me. Sounds like paranoia. No one was allowed to read the newspaper, listen to the radio, watch movies, or have any contact with those outside the St. Benedict Center. As a way to keep their activities secret because the world was out to get them, they had strange code words. Morning Mass offered by Feeney, even though he should not be offering Mass, it was a mortal sin for him to offer Mass, being excommunicated, was to be called First Breakfast. So we're going to First Breakfast. That's what they called Mass. And Benediction of the Blessed Sacrament in the evening was called Tea. So we're going for tea. And the Blessed Sacrament was called DN, for Dominus Noster, Latin for Our Lord. So did you receive DN at first breakfast and things like these?
Bizarre.
Yeah. Every child was assigned an angel, one of the married women, a so-called nun, to watch over them and punish them for slightest infraction of any rule made by mother or father, meaning Feeney and so-called sister. Punishment included being sent to Brother Isidore. Now, Brother Isidore was a married guy, of course, who was called BP for the Big Punisher. He was a physically big man. And punishments included being cracked over the buttocks repeatedly by a 2x4, being punched with closed fists, until they passed out, got knocked unconscious. Getting 10 lashes with a long black rubber hose across the bare back and stomach, which left marks. Being repeatedly beaten with a belt in front of the other little brothers and sisters to show them what happens when you disobey a rule of father, meaning Feeney, or so-called Sister Catherine Clark, mother. And it was all done to save you from hell. Better you suffer now than in hell. The children were told that an angel from heaven would be watching them at first breakfast. And if they didn't pay attention, the angel would report back to God so they would get an especially painful place to burn in hell forever if they didn't go to Father right away and confess and change their ways. One boy suffered from nocturnal enuresis, which is the medical term for nighttime bedwetting. Instead of being taken to a doctor, which any normal person would do, the boy was accused of disobedience and was told to stop or else. Now, of course, poor kid can't stop. He's got a medical condition. So in order to make him stop wetting the bed, the big punisher beat him in front of the other kids with a belt. When that didn't work, he was given only bread and water to eat for several days until he passed out from lack of nutrition. And then he was scalded with hot water and even burned with matches that left permanent scars.
What?
The children were told not to get close with anyone emotionally, including their parents. And particular friendships, that's what they were called. Don't have a particular friendship. To be friends like in a very esoteric way, like, that person's my friend in Christ type of thing. But a particular friendship was forbidden by Sister Catherine. Again, when I call her sister, that's always in quotations. The children were not allowed to have real friendships with each other and were punished if their angel, this married nun, thought they were being friendly with anyone. Particular friendships were worldly and mortally sinful. When someone from the outside world would criticize something that Feeney said, usually when he was out protesting against Richard Cushing, Feeney would blasphemously make the sign of the cross over them and say in English, "I curse you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost." Amen.
What? That's
Prior
publicly.
As
He did-
public, yes,
What?
there were several witnesses to that in the open. He said that. Prior to Vatican II, Feeney did not allow any member of the slaves, so-called, to attend mass of any other priest, as every other priest other than him was a heretic. Every priest in the world except for him was a heretic and part of the evil world. And on one occasion, there were two witnesses that said Feeney referred to His Holiness Pope Pius XII as a dirty wop. Now, wop, W-O-P, meaning without a passport, is a degrading and derogatory ethnic slur used against Italians. It's like calling an Irish person a Mick or calling a German person a Kraut. And he referred to the Holy Father as a wop, dirty wop. So if that seems too horrific to be true, Feeneyite author Gary Potter's book, after the Boston Heresy case, actually talks about Calliope's book, Walled In. Potter read the book and he attempted to defend the child abuse. And his attempt to do this is so outlandish, it makes you wonder how such a person with an ounce of reason and morality could possibly write such absurdities. And I'm going to quote from his book. It's difficult to grasp the extent to which the Feeniyites will go to sanitize their founder. Potter never claims that Calliope's account of the abuse was false or exaggerated. He never says that. He never says, well, that didn't really happen. A kid didn't, get given bread and water for days and get burned with matches for wetting the bed. That didn't happen. He doesn't say that. All right. And he refers to all of this abuse as corporal punishment. Now, I'm sorry, you give your kid a slap on the ass. Okay. That's corporal punishment. Giving him bread and water until the kid's so malnourished that he passes out and burning him with matches and scalding him with hot water. No, sorry. You're a child abuser. You're a piece of garbage.
Well, and especially, I mean, I totally agree. And especially if you're doing it from the other, for someone else's child, I mean, it's, you're saying this, okay, it's abuse is abuse. So don't get me wrong. That's from parents, of course, as well. Being a parent, it's absolutely insane and heartbreaking to hear these stories. But it's even more insane when you think again that this was a commune. And that these people are allowing their natural children to be treated that way. I mean, that's it's insane. I mean, like I'm so shocked by that. It is really wild. You said before we started that there are, people who are supporters of his and many people who just don't know anything about him. And I was totally one of those 99% that I always thought of him as, yeah, he was mistaken and he was a heretic in this one case, but he was a little too, yeah, a little too forward in his beliefs, I suppose. But wow, I'm shocked.
As I said, the real Leonard Feeney, the real Leonard Feeney is a demonic character.
Whew.
And I said that before. I used that strong verbiage. I believe like demon possessed. Uh, who else could do things like this to 39 small children? Who else could demand of married couples that they've renounced the marital debt to each other? The whole primary purpose of marriage is the procreation and education of children. And he forbade them from doing that. He forbade them to do that. He has no right to do that. Even under the church, and if you want to go back to saints who had Josephite marriages, it was done with the full approbation of the church.
Right.
It wasn't this wacky nonsense. And I've had people come on my blog, and I'm sorry, that's one of the few times I'm trying to be, I try to be mellow and respectful of all people. Even when they come on and disagree with me, that's fine. You can disagree with me. But one of the few times I had when people tried to defend this, no, there's no defense of this. And if people, you just don't, you're one of these, what was I called? A snowflake, who thinks that children shouldn't be disciplined. No, give me a break. Cracking them over buttocks with a 2x4, giving them bread and water and locking them in their room for days at a time, scalding with water, matches, slapping them with a rubber hose until it left marks. That's if you were in New York, you would be arrested and thrown in prison and
Deservedly. Yeah.
You belong to be
Agreed.
there. You should be there. That's where you belong. You don't belong in a religious camp. You belong in prison.
Well, and it's no wonder that you see, the vast majority of the world, I think people who even are supposedly Catholic think of Catholicism as kind of this, especially old Catholicism. You look back in the 1960s and they think of this. They think of McCarrick. They think of this abuse, and it's because it was real and it was allowed to happen. It was purposely forced to happen, and something like this also as well. And you see how the devil worked, and he worked on separating the family and on separating the church. I mean, and obviously the devil will never prevail over the church, but certainly prevailed over the hierarchy and of Rome and the institutions. And I mean, it shows the brilliance of the devil and how well it worked. And this story shows both, right? It shows exactly both. It shows how the devil worked with him to teach error and also to break apart families, and it's unbelievable.
It really is. I mean, as I was learning this stuff, you know, uh, I'm almost 60 years old, and I'm an old guy, and I was like, just when I thought I've seen it all, it's like
Oh,
I was like, whoa, I never realized just how evil, Leonard Feeney was, and how sick this stuff was, and how well covered up it was. How well
absolutely.
covered up it was. 39 children. I mean, books out there. I mean, books written and again, here's the thing. Walden was not a bestseller, to say the least. When I mention the book, most people say, "What's that?" They don't know. It's not like a big name book. And after the Boston heresy case is not exactly on the New York Times bestseller list either. So Potter's defense was, he was probably hoping that most people didn't have the book, because he doesn't go into elaborating either what these punishments were, these quote unquote corporal Here's what he said.
Mhm.
Now, I'm going to give you exact quotations from his book. See if what he says lines up with the reality. Quote, the situation, my commentary, situation means involving hitting the children the way I just described, okay, was far different in the 1950s. It was not merely the center, meaning the St. Benedict Center, children who were strictly disciplined. Children in general were subject to more discipline than today, when he wrote the book in 1995. Even public school teachers were permitted in most states to inflict corporal punishment in loco parentis. And that's Latin meaning in place of the parents. I was a public school teacher here in New York City. Okay. Never at any time. My mother was a product of the public school system in New York City. Okay. Um, at no time was she beaten. Okay. She was not beaten with a 2x4. She wasn't denied food. She wasn't scalded with water. He continues. The present writer, meaning Potter himself, vividly remembers his sixth grade public school teacher, a man in his 30s, sternly reading the relevant empowering paragraphs from the state code to the class. Okay, so you got a teacher who's also got a few screws missing. However, in my elementary school, corporal punishment was usually inflicted by the principal, who was a male, at least when it came to the punishment of the boys. The principal used a wooden paddle about the size of a heft of a cricket bat. You dropped your trousers and bent over the principal's desk, and there was no talk about this hurts me more than it does you. Parents were informed of such punishment ex post facto, meaning after the fact. That was on pages 189 and 190 of the 211 edition of After the Boston Heresy Case. Now, I'm surprised Potter didn't analogize to being beaten and killed to beating and killing his slave during the South and prior to the Civil War.
Right.
Right. So
it's all good.
It's all good. Just because something was done in the past,
Right.
even let's say this is true. Again, he doesn't give any citations. This is his own ipsy dixit. He's saying that this happened, and he's saying that again, without any citations to anything, any newspapers or anything like that, or any code that said that this had happened, that the principals were doing these things on a regular basis. They were empowered by the California public school system to do this. This is just his own say-so that this happened. And just because something was, so I'm going to say, let's give him this anecdotal evidence is true. Let's say this stuff really happened, even though, again, he cites to nothing that would back it up. Would this make it right that the principal hit them like this? And does anybody really believe that what Potter just described is similar to the abuse that I described at the St. Benedict Center? Here's something else that he writes. Okay, and I'm summarizing here, and I'll get into the direct quote. The punishments weren't that bad because Robert Calliope became successful later in life, and the St. Benedict Center paid his college tuition. That's literally what he's going to argue. Here's how he says it. That's my take. You tell me if I got it right. Quote, Connor, which is Calliope's pen name, undercuts himself by this admission. I had lived my life under strict discipline for the first 21 years, and when I finally left, that self-discipline helped to make the adjustment. The habit of hard working and single-mindedness helped me to graduate from MIT, complete a master's degree at Stanford in electrical engineering, and land a job at a large electronics corporation. He did not mention that his MIT tuition was paid by the center. And that's on page 191 of the 2011 edition. Now, here's some background information. Robert Calliope was a highly intelligent young boy who became a highly intelligent young man and was beaten less severely than most of the other 39. He had an unusually strong will and produced by a fear of the beatings that he witnessed. And his fear of hell, which he said in his book, was constantly used to make children fearful and became a form of psychological abuse. Everything not to the liking of Feeney and Clark was labeled as a mortal sin. John Calliope finally got up the courage to leave, and with the help of Bishop Bernard Flanagan of Massachusetts, obtained lawyers to successfully sue to get his 5 children back in 1965 at the end of Vatican II. Robert had a hard time adjusting and remained in contact with St. Benedict Center against his father's concerns. Robert broke all ties in the year 1970, and to the best of my knowledge and belief, became an agnostic. I was unable to verify if he's still alive. If so, I think he will be 75 this year, 75 or 76 this year. I was unable to verify from any other source that Calliope's MIT tuition was paid for by the St. Benedict Center. Even if, ad arguendo, we were to say that that happened, it does nothing to vitiate the abuse perpetrated by the St. Benedict Center. There are many victims of Vatican II clergy who went on to be. I know a New York City police detective, high-ranking one. I wrote a post about him, who was sodomized by a member of the Vatican multiple times. He actually went out to go and murder him, and then decided not to go through with it. Does that mean that sodomizing children is okay? Because if he became a successful cop, then therefore, because what comes after it is good. Therefore, in itself, it was good. It's just crazy, crazy stuff. And when I was in the brief exchange with Brother Andre, he said that Robert Calapi said he was sorry that he had written the book. So I asked him where I could find this. Is there any place written online where I could go? And he says, no, it was just said verbally. Now, taking Brother Andre at his word, again, taking him at his word that he actually said this, why was he sorry for writing the book? In other words, you can be sorry for something, but not because it's untruthful. Maybe sorry for writing for it because of other things that happened to him as a backlash against it. Could be a lot of reasons he's sorry for it, or taken out of context. What did he really mean by this? So we only have, again, Brother Andre's ipsy dixit that he said it. He admits himself that it was not recorded anywhere. So I have to believe that it is, if it happened, we can't give it any weight if he said that. Here's something else that was actually written. Again, I'm going by what's actually written. Raising children communally has, quote unquote, difficulties. Unquestionably, this again is a quote from Potter. Unquestionably, Calapi's book offers a picture, probably a fairly accurate one, his words, of some of the difficulties that arise when communal upbringing of children is attempted by any group. Page 191 of the 2011 edition. Attempted by any group. What kind of people go around attempting this?
Right.
Bringing up children communally is contrary to the natural and divine positive law and canon law. It's against everything. The parents have an obligation to raise and educate their children, not some wacky commune. Declaring that physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual abuse is a difficulty is like saying being held prisoner in a concentration camp is inconvenient. It's not inconvenient. No, it's horrible. The Gulag Archipelago. Oh, that's a shame. No, it's not a shame. It goes way beyond that. Here's something else Potter says. And again, I'm paraphrasing, and then I'll give you the exact quote. The children at the St. Benedict Center are better off than children of divorced parents. Quote, and after his descriptions of the corporal punishment meted out to the center children, Connor, meaning Calapi's, real subject is the emotional deprivation felt by a child separated from his natural parents and the difficulties it can produce later in life. Center children, even those raised communally, but in a stable environment, could actually have enjoyed greater emotional security than a bride with 6 fathers, her natural one and 5 stepfathers, in attendance at her wedding. Again, page 191. I have a hard time comprehending how Potter could, in good conscience, call the living hell at St. Benedict Center a stable environment. That's a direct quote. Potter is not a psychologist. He's not a psychiatrist, and he offers no evidence for this assertion that being severely abused is better than being raised in a divorced household with multiple ex-spouses. I'm not saying that's a good situation either, but I'm telling you which one I'd pick if I was, getting beaten. I think I'd take the ex-spouses.
Right.
I guess one could say being beaten until you're permanently disabled is better than being beaten to death. But I mean, do you really want to go that route? So that's from, again, a Feeneyite defender. The last thing I'm going to talk about, the bizarre and heretical theology from Feeney that is not baptism of blood and baptism of desire. Not those things. Apart from his denial of baptism of blood and baptism of desire, Feeney taught other non-Catholic theological nonsense. In The Bread of Life, pages 97 to 98, Father Feeney writes these most disconcerting words, and I quote, I think baptism makes you a son of God. I do not think it makes you a child of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I think the Holy Eucharist makes you a child of Mary. What happens to those children who die between baptism and the Holy Eucharist? They go to the beatific vision. They are in the kingdom of Mary, but they are not the children of Mary. Mary is their queen, but not their mother. They are like little angels. There was a strong tradition in the church that always spoke of them as those angels who died in infancy. They have the beatific vision. They see the great queen, but not move as part of the mystical body of Christ. I say, if a child dies after having received baptism, he dies the Son of God, but not yet as the child of Mary, unquote. Now, baptism makes you part of the one true church, the mystical body of Christ, and Feeney talks of infants who die after baptism as not moving in heaven as part of the mystical body of Christ. They are not true Catholics. Isn't Feeney contradicting his own so-called strict interpretation outside, right? The Blessed Virgin Mary is the mother of Christ, who in Christ is the invisible head of the church, and by extension to each member of the mystical body. How dare Feeney say that baptized infants who die before First Communion are not a child of Mary? And note again, what is all of these things have in common? There's never a citation to anything. Notice how many citations I have given
Right.
and what I looked up. He doesn't cite to one approved theologian, one canonist, an encyclical or any magisterial teaching, any authoritative, the Code of Canon Law, any authoritative church declaration in support of his novel ideas, for good reason. There aren't any. It's more heresy.
Bizarre. It kind of reminds me of Palma de Troya, kind of, right? He's like just pulling things out, just kind of like, and this, why exactly?
Exactly.
Bizarre.
They made stuff up. Now, I'll get into a couple of things that Father Feeney was truly extra ecclesiam. He was outside the church. 2 defenses made of Feeney by the Feneyites. The decree of excommunication was allegedly defective because it was only signed by a notary. Now, a notary in the church, before the Robert Council of Vatican II, is a type of ecclesiastical lawyer who draws up legal documents. The decree against Father Feeney was defined as a legal act which the Pope or Roman congregation gives orally in an audience or a plenary congregation. Such an act is taken down in writing by one of the curial official presence, who afterwards puts it into the appropriate legal form. And it's a standard form for many Roman decrees, including excommunications. And many examples can be given from the Acta Apostolicae Sedis. So it's not, it's not some girl in the bank who's 19 years old and, notarizes your letter.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about what a notary is, okay? This is a church notary, an ecclesiastical office, highly trained person. Another falsehood used to defend Feeney. Feeney was only excommunicated for disobedience and not for his teachings. No, wrong. The letter of the Supreme Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office to Archbishop Richard Cushing of Boston states the following, and I quote, "This Supreme Sacred Congregation has very carefully followed the beginning and the continuation of the serious controversy raised by certain associates of the St. Benedict Center and of Boston College concerning the interpretation of the maxim, outside the church, no salvation. After having examined all the necessary and useful documents on the subject, among them the files sent by your chancellery, the appeals and reports wherein the associates of the St. Benedict Center expound their opinions and objections, besides many of the documents referring to this controversy collected through the official channels, the Sacred Congregation has reached the certitude that this unfortunate question was raised because the principle outside the church no salvation has not been well understood or examined, and the controversy has become envenomed as a result of a serious lack of discipline on the part of certain members of the aforementioned associations who have refused to give respect and obedience to the legitimate authorities. The decree of excommunication against Feeney states, and I quote, since Leonard Feeney remained in Boston, St. Benedict Center, and since he has suspended from performing his priestly duties for a long time because of his grave disobedience to the authority of the church, in no way moved by repeated warnings and threats of incurring excommunication ipso facto, and has failed to submit the most eminent and reverend fathers charged with the responsibility for safeguarding faith and morals during plenary session held February 4th, 1953, have declared him excommunicated with all the effects that this has in law. On Thursday, February 12th, 1953, our Most Holy Father, Pius XII, Pope by divine providence, has approved and confirmed the decree of these most eminent fathers and ordered that this be made a matter of public record. Given in Rome, in the general quarters of the Holy Office, February 13th, 1953, Marius Crovini, notary, signed. Note well 2 facts. The Holy Office is charged with safeguarding faith and morals, not enforcing discipline. They can't even if they wanted to. It's not given to them. And second, the decree of excommunication was approved and confirmed by Pope Pius XII and ordered to be published. Proof of number 1, the Holy Office is charged with safeguarding faith and morals, not enforcing discipline. According to the canons Abbo and Hannon, quote, the Sacred Congregation for Religious is exclusively competent in matters affecting the government, the discipline, the studies, the property, and the privileges of religious of the Latin Rite, including religious of both sexes, those of both solemn and simple vows, and members of societies living in common without vows, as well as members of secular third orders, unquote. Volume 1, page 308. Hence, if Feeney's problem was merely and exclusively one of disobedience, it would be a disciplinary matter to be handled by the Sacred Congregation for religious. The Holy Office would not and could not involve itself in a purely disciplinary matter. That's not what they do. And proof of number 2, the decree of excommunication was approved and confirmed by Pope Pius XII in order to be published. Quote, in one respect, the Holy Office differs from all other congregations in that it exercises both judicial and administrative power, or at least may only use judicial power at the request of the parties interested. Thus, the Holy Office, in dealing with all matters which directly or indirectly concern faith or morals, will not judge only heresy, but, where it pronounces an adverse judgment, will also apply the canonical punishments incurred by heretics and schismatics, unquote. Theologian Williams, The Catholic Church in Action, 1958, page 92. The Holy Office has the authority to excommunicate any person. The prefect is the Pope himself. The pro-prefect heads the congregation on a daily basis. It used to be, at that time, Cardinal Ottaviani. He became the, in 1953, it might have been just before he took over in 1953, but there's a pro-prefect. But the Pope must personally approve all decisions and order them published from the Holy Office. Pope Pius XII personally approved the decree of excommunication emanating from the Holy Office and ordered it to be published. The solemn letter of excommunication against Leonard Feeney was duly published in the Acta Apostolicae Sedis, the official publication of the Holy See. The reference number, which I have, is 45-100. All laws promulgated through it have the binding force, with no other form of publication or promulgation being necessary. The inescapable conclusion, regardless of what any Feeneyite tells you, is that Feeney was properly and validly excommunicated for false teaching, for teaching heresy. So who would want a monster like Leonard Feeney? Answer, the Vatican II sect. Eventually, the St. Benedict Center compound came down. Feeney and Clark should have been brought up on charges, but they did a good job of hiding behind the First Amendment and the free exercise of religion, which made the authorities highly reticent to investigate. Ironically, the First Amendment, written by Freemasons, runs counter to church teaching against the separation of church and state, placing all religions on equal footing. So so-called Father Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus had no problem using it to hide behind and berate the Holy Father, Pope Pius XII. Once Montini came in, and he liked that false pope, he didn't call him a wop. Father Feeney, the former Father Feeney, died reconciled to the Vatican II sect under Montini. He was never made to recant his error. This hero of the dogma, and I'm saying that sarcastically, refused to acknowledge that BOD and BOB, baptism, desire, and baptism, blood, are part of that very same dogma of Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus. He finds favor with a false pope and was spoken of in glowing terms by, guess who spoke well of him when he died? Avery Dulles. These heretics promulgated documents which, among other errors, declare false sex to be a means of salvation.
Wow.
Talk about irony. Just as Feeney could hold inconsistent views on other topics, he too was able to embrace false texts of universal salvation and offer the Novus Bogus Mass. He did offer the Vatican II sect Novus Bogus Mass. Leonard Feeney and the law of non-contradiction were never on speaking terms, I suppose. And a Vatican II sect lawyer, now I found this, which I found very instructive. There's a Vatican II sect canon lawyer named Peter Veer. He's a married layman. The canon lawyers, before Vatican II could only be priests, canonists like Father DePaul. But he wrote a letter. He responded a letter to the aforementioned Brother Andre Marie, who was a modern Feeneyite, defender of Feeney. And he responded, he asked him whether or not we should call him Father Feeney and acknowledge that he died reconciled to the Catholic Church. Now, don't forget, Brother Andre is not is a member of the Vatican II sect. They're not recognized up there in New Hampshire. To the best of my knowledge and belief, they're not recognized by the church. But that's again the internal contradictions of Feenites. And this letter that Veer responded with on May 29th, 2007 says the following: there is no question Father Feeney died in full communion with the Catholic Church. Paul VI lifted Father's excommunication while Father was still alive. There's no evidence that Father recanted his understanding of EENS, Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus, BOB, baptism of blood, or BOD, baptism of desire. The actual lifting of Father's excommunication was executed by Father Richard Schmaruk, 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 if anyone wants to look that up, a priest of the Boston Archdiocese, on behalf of Bishop Bernard Flanagan. While visiting Boston about 10 years ago, that's Peter Veer speaking, spoke with Father Schmarek, and he personally corroborated the events that led him to reconciling Father Feeney with the church. On pages 259 to 262 of his book, They Fought the Good Fight, Brother Thomas Mary Sennott diligently chronicles the reconciliation of Father Feeney, as well as the subsequent reconciliation of several of Father's spiritual descendants. Brother Sennott also notes that Father's memorial mass was celebrated by Bishop Bernard Flanagan in the Cathedral of St. Paul. This would have given rise to scandal had Father not been fully reconciled with the church. Brother Sennott's book received an imprimi protest from Bishop Timothy Harrington, meaning the book is free from doctrinal or moral error. Thus, unless one is willing to declare oneself a sede vacantist or sede privationist, the evidence is overwhelming that Father Feeney died in full communion with the church without recanting his position. Most of Father Feeney's spiritual descendants have been reconciled with the church without having to renounce or recant their interpretation of BOD, or EENS, and that's kept on the Catholicism.org website, which I referenced when I downloaded it. It's up there. This is signed by Peter Veer, canon lawyer. Therefore, the Vatican II sect will allow you to believe that everyone goes to heaven, nobody goes to heaven, but only the truth of BOD, BOB, and EENS, as properly taught by the one true church, is excluded. And finally, let's look at some falsehoods that are still being. Now that I've said all this, let me just summarize. Feeney started a non-canonical cult made up of married couples pretending to be brothers and nuns. He made the couples renounce their marital rights and took away their God-appointed duty to raise and educate their own kids. The children were subjected to overwhelming emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual abuse. Robert Calliope lost his faith, as did the other author, Chadwick, who now supports LGBTQIA++ perversion. Yet the sanitizing falsehoods and information not given by modern-day Feneyites is continuing unabated. Under the heading of, quote-unquote, Sister Catherine Goddard Clark, here's what was published on that website. In 1942, the well-known and loved Jesuit priest, Father Leonard Feeney, became associated with the work of the center, counseling students, lecturing, and eventually becoming, by general demand and by appointment from his superiors in the Society of Jesus and the Archdiocese of Boston, spiritual director of the St. Benedict Center. An author and poet in his own right, Father Feeney was hailed by his Jesuit provincial as, quote, the greatest theologian we have in the United States by far, unquote, and was also acclaimed publicly as America's Chesterton. Before long, Father was lecturing on Holy Scripture to a packed center every Thursday evening, while Mrs. Clark enjoyed equal success with her Monday evening lectures on church history. Unquote. Feeney did not qualify as a theologian by a long shot. They refer to Clark as both in the same paragraph, sister and Mrs., like you can be a married nun. All right, that's a good one. No mention is made she abandoned her own two adopted children to communal living and presided over the abuse of both them and the whole 39 innocent children of the St. Benedict Center. Furthermore, what can honestly be said about a priest who did all these satanic things? Was Feeney mad, possessed, or one of the most incredible clerics of all? Let the Feeneyites consider their beloved founder in the light of the truth. Ironically, Feeney died extra ecclesiam in the embrace of the Vatican II sect. And that's my report on Leonard Feeney.
Wow, and I'm truly floored. As is often the case with shows with you and Dre, but it really blows my mind. It so often comes up in conversation: Feeneyism, baptism of desire, etc. It's kind of one of these common topics online. I learned so much today. I just can't even believe. I can't believe so much of this stuff is misreported. I've always heard that he was excommunicated because he didn't go to Rome. And you clearly you just read from the actual document. I mean, how does this stuff? It just I think is it the age we live in, or has it always been the case where people just don't actually do the work? They hear it, someone says it. Maybe it's the Diamond Brothers say, hey, no, actually this is the case, and it just gets passed word of mouth, and no one ever actually looks. That's kind of my impression. I think so. Thank goodness that you do. I just listened to Father Gabriel Avery also today at the Fatima conference, and he had a couple of talks that made me think the same. That people just don't actually look. They don't actually read. It's just it's incredible. I mean, real quick, just briefly off topic. People should go check. We're going to publish this soon. But he was mentioning about the changes in 1955 and how everyone always says it was Bonini who wrote them. And Father just says, no, it's not true. You can actually read the minutes of the conversations of the 55 liturgical changes, and Bonini had nothing to do with it. And it's just one of those things that people always say it, but they don't actually look into it. So Introibo, I had to thank you again, as always, for doing the work. I mean, the dirty work, and literally just saying, okay, this is actually what something says.
Yeah. And you're going to see them coming out of the woodwork. No, it's not true. He's a saint. He was, he was persecuted by the evil Jew-loving, Richard Cushing, heretic Cushingite, blah, 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 blah. I can tell you word for word what they're going to say before they say it, because I've heard it so many times. It always comes out, I don't know why, everyone has to be a Jew-loving heretic. That's what they like, that term, Jew-loving heretic. He's a Jew-loving heretic. Right. No, sorry, but the facts don't change. And, and I've quoted his own defenders. The California public school system, had principals beating people, and with just his own ipsy dixit, this anecdotal, if you want to call that evidence. And even if I concede all of that evidence, which I did during my talk, I conceded that happened. That's nowhere near what happened at St. Benedict Center. You can't even begin to compare it. It was bad, but I mean, you just can't even compare it. And, Brother Andre saying, well, he was sorry he wrote the book. But you just have to take my word for it because he said it verbally. Okay, well, even if he did, what was he sorry? What was the context? And did he say it was wrong? He never claimed that Calliope said it was erroneous what he wrote, or that he lied. Big difference.
Amazing. No, it's amazing. It's another, microcosm of what happened in this time. This time of evil confusion, where the devil was really let loose. I mean, seemingly, in the church and in the world, sexual revolution, perversion in the church, sodomism, etc. I mean, just insanity. And this is a perfect encapsulation of it. And it's disturbing. It's really one of the craziest, most insane, disturbing stories I've ever heard. But I'm glad to have heard it, because it really is. It's a lot of ammunition to say. I mean, first of all, and again, I want everyone to remember, I'm going to have Father Benedict on to talk about the actual errors of Feeneyism and the Diamond Brothers. So that will be another conversation coming up soon. But I think this is another one where you can just say, hey, do you even want to mention this guy in your conversations? I mean, do you have anything to do with it's wild? But again, I think it's like Luther, from evil, from a bad tree comes, well, what kind of fruit again, guys? I think we all know. And I think we all can say after this podcast what type of tree Leonard Feeney was as well. Everyone, I hope you appreciate this from Introibo, as I always do. Please go check out his work, Introibo ad altare Dei 2.blogspot.com. As you see today, and as always, it is content that you're just not going to find. You're not going to find it. And I mean that very sincerely. No one does the work. You'll see plenty of people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever saying, hey, here, this is the truth about, okay, based on what? Where's that coming from? And Introibo, thank goodness, has gone and actually done the research and has, again, used canon law and church teaching to tell the truth. So Introibo, again, thank you so much for doing this. We hope to have you on again sometime soon. Perhaps talking about occultism again, perhaps something else. As we see, you're always full. You got something up your sleeve in so many different topics, of which, again, everyone should go check out your blog. It's been a good one. I appreciate it. And until next time, God bless. And hey, take a break sometimes, huh?
Thanks, Kevin. We'll do.
All right, take it easy.